Welcome to part one of our Bacon broadcast, where I am once again joined by Peter Haworth, who has shared his thoughts, insight and guidance regarding phase time recording. In part one, Peter covers liability costs, case planning costs and strategy costs. Welcome, Peter.
Good afternoon.
So, when a fee earner is considering liability, which phase does this belong? Do you think it sits in one phase, or do you think that there is argument for it to be included in several phases?
Well, to my mind, there's no hard and fast rule. The starting point, it always seems to me, is to look at Schedule 2 of the costs practice direction that sets out in some detail the phases, tasks and activities which the budget is to be split into. And in my mind, and in my view, the way of looking at it, or any piece of work, is it may well fit into several different phases. So, for example, when you're considering liability, well, that phase clearly could be in the pre-action work, where the task there is legal investigation, for example, or a factual investigation. But often in a case, liability rears its head at a later stage. For example, new witness evidence comes to light. And in those circumstances, it seems to me, for example, that you would then have to put in the appropriate phase, namely the witness statement phase, the task and the activity with which the new witness evidence is concerned. Likewise, that then might engender further work in relation to statements of case. If, for example, an amendment to the statement is required, and again, the appropriate task and activity should be put into that particular phase. There is no real way of simply saying, well, this piece of work goes in one phase, it's limited to that one phase, and it may be the activity which you're undertaking will cross over into several different phases. I think as a start, though, it seems to me that if, for example, new witness evidence has triggered that review of the file, then in those circumstances, that review of the witness statement and that new evidence by way of witness evidence must go into the witness statement phase. Hope that helps.
Yes, it really does, Peter, because I suspect that actually there's often times where fee earners will look at several things. They might look at documents and witness evidence, for example, and even expert evidence, and then take a view on liability. And am I correct to say that a detailed file note explaining that position, so therefore the correct interpretation can be made when you are assigning a phase to it to decide actually in certain circumstances that review of liability could actually belong in those three phases and split accordingly? Would that be the correct approach?
Yes, I mean, I think, as I've said on many occasions in the past, you can't beat having a detailed file note of your thought process at the time that you're undertaking that work. It's a contemporaneous note. It tells the judge who's dealing with the costs at the end of the day what you were thinking at the time. And remember, it's his duty when he's assessing your costs to, as it were, put himself in your chair to, as it were, look exactly at what you were doing at that time, not to apply some sort of hindsight or retrospective foresight to what you've been doing, but to try and put himself in your position when you made that decision at the time. And that's a well-known case of Francis and Dickerson. And that case is equally good now as it was pre-CPR.
That's really helpful, because that leads nicely into the next question, which is which phase would case planning and strategy be included? Again, I'm assuming file notes would really assist in that with those types of entries too.
Well, even more so, because in a sense, this is a rather nebulous phase. It's an important phase in litigation, but it can often be seen, particularly by a paying party, as it were, just bulking up a file, or effectively just a standard way of saying the file is being reviewed. But it could be very important in relation to where there is a team of fee earners working on a case, that the case is planned between the different fee earners. That planning may effectively be a saving in cost for a paying party, on the basis that the case planning may be moving, for example, certain areas of work down from being dealt with by a B grade fee earner down to a C grade fee earner or a D grade fee earner. Well, to my mind, the work involved in determining that is recoverable. Some judges may take a contrary view, but it seems to me that if it's a cost saving, then in those circumstances it is rightly chargeable and recoverable in the litigation. So again, a detailed file note is clearly going to help in these circumstances, and case planning and strategy, it seems to me, can fall again within a number of different phases. For example, if you're considering the strategy in relation to pleadings, it clearly goes in statements of case. Again, witness statements, it goes in relation, the relevant task and activity goes in relation to witness statement. It can also, and probably will do, apply in relation to the phase in the bill for trial preparation, because the strategy that you may adopt going into the trial is clearly something that can go in that phase. So it strikes me, don't be frightened of peppering your budget in the different phases with a task, with an activity, which at first blush may not fit into, may seem as though it doesn't fit into that phase, but clearly when you apply the criteria, which they are in Schedule 2, clearly that work, to my mind, is eminently suitable to be put in the budget.
Yeah, so again, I suppose it's a similar approach to what we've just talked about, particularly if you're reviewing lots of things, is to have that in the file note, because it may well be that you are reviewing things across the whole of the phases when you're doing that case planning strategy meeting, and therefore really is it correct for it to be split across those phases that you are reviewing rather than simply including in one phase.
Thank you to Peter for his view regarding phase time recording in part 1 of our Bacon broadcast. Please do look out for part 2 of this broadcast next Tuesday, when Peter will cover rehabilitation and case management costs, deputyship costs, and the approach to considering limitation. Thank you.